Welcome to the Season 3 Ward's Way podcast, where we're covering the hot legislative topics of 2025. From tariffs to tunnels and bridges. From foreign trade zones to workers' compensation. To the Fort Lauderdale International Boat Show. To the Marine Research Hub. Industry experts and clarification on the B1, B2 visas. Join us as we celebrate 75 years in business, and we're just getting started. So welcome today to Season 3 Ward's Way podcast. And today I have with me my friend Debora Radtke, who's president and owner of American Yacht Agents. So welcome today. And we are going to be talking about B1, B2 visas.
Favorite topic.
A favorite topic. And actually, it's interesting. I went to your website, which is AmericanYachtAgents.com. And you have is it a blog post from 2018? So talk to me about the B1, B2 visas and what's happened since 2018 in your, but maybe give everybody an example of what does American Yacht Agents do?
Well, thanks, Christy. American Yacht Agents is a full-time, a full-service yacht agency that provides shore support to visiting yachts.
Okay. And
probably the best explanation is because people get confused between agency and management.
Okay.
Management covers is the global umbrella for a yacht. Okay. Whereas an agency handles the local port state needs.
Okay. Of the boat.
Yes.
And you handle it inside the United States, outside the United States?
Inside the United States.
Okay.
We have partners in Puerto Rico that we work with.
Okay.
And we are primarily based in South Florida, from Fort Pierce to Miami. Do work in Key West.
Okay.
Also had a presence with a couple of our vessels that were in New Orleans for the Super Bowl, and have vessels that do cruise up the East Coast and also into the Great Lakes.
Okay. And that's one of your specialties,
Yes.
going from here all the way up to the Great Lakes.
Yeah.
Yeah, which is a lot of maneuvering through a lot of different waterways and water areas. So I'm
Yes.
sure that they need your assistance on that. But talk to me about the visas. So when does a boat reach out to your company and say?
Not early enough.
Okay. Yeah.
So we end up providing guidance on applying for visas
Okay.
to a lot of crew. We end up with a lot of captains that call us, unfortunately, once they have a problem.
Right.
Currently there seems to be a lot of confusion, although as you mentioned the blog from 2018, things really haven't changed. It's still the same visa, it's still the same requirements. The only thing that has changed, and probably what's causing some of the confusion now, is that we had some leeway during COVID.
Okay. What kind of leeway? What was being allowed?
Well, there was an understanding of the fact that consulates were closed.
True.
And people were having a hard time getting visas. We used to be able to get when needed, there's a waiver that if you arrive in the U.S. without the proper documentation, you can apply for this waiver. It's $500 and some. They would still vet you to make sure that you had, to make sure that they weren't giving the waiver to someone who was going to have
a bad apple, right? A bad character,
right. And a lot of times those waivers were based on the fact that the CBP officers knew us and, knew that we were vouching for this crew member on this yacht, that, the boat wasn't supposed to come here in the first place. Suddenly it's here, and, the crew member wasn't able to get a visa in time. Well,
and didn't that happen a lot? When COVID first came, they pretty much, when I say they, the Caribbean said, thank you very much. You've extended your, you've stayed your stay, but we'd like for you to leave. And basically kicked out in the middle of charter season a lot of the yachts, and they all came here. We were their first port of entry.
Well, one of the things that happened during COVID, and ironically, I happened to be in the hospital at the time when the world shut down, and I'm getting phone calls from captains asking me what to do, and I said, get to St. Thomas.
Okay.
Get to
Okay.
St. Thomas. Once you're in St. Thomas or Puerto Rico, you're in the U.S., and then we can bring you to the mainland.
Okay.
And,
Good advice.
And their concern was that they felt, at that point, they felt the U.S. was the safest place for them to go. They knew that there was the medical, the medical
Sure.
care and everything, and no one knew what was happening.
Right. I know for us as a company, Wards Marine Electric, we were considered an essential service here. So when those boats came into the United States and this crew was displaced and they thought they were having a charter season, and now their consulate is closed in their home country, and they're staying on board these boats. They've become liveaboards now, and all of these marinas are packed. I know that the U.S. Coast Guard wanted us to make sure that the waterways stayed navigable, and so you have to maintain these vessels. And so it was a very interesting time to have all of these crews in on visas, and maybe expired visas, and maybe needing to get these extensions. And how did it all play out after that? So over time, everybody got to eventually go to their consulate.
Well, the Marine Industry Association of South Florida was really instrumental in a number of things, one of which was getting the marine industry named as a
Essential
service.
Absolutely.
We worked, MIASF worked closely with lobbyists and the government agencies to also allow crew on B1 visas to be able to travel.
Right.
So a lot of our boats that ended up basing here during the height of COVID, which is that, the first kind of March to June,
Sure.
we were able to do rotations. We were able to get
Okay.
them onto planes.
Good. And that's important for the industry, but explain to people, why does that matter? If I'm from Nebraska and I'm listening to this and I'm saying, okay, so the crew member got stuck here and it was a hard time to get them back. Why does it matter whether the crew was here with the boat or then they had to rotate out? How important is it to have the crew with the boat and keep that boat going?
Well, I mean, these are multi-million-dollar assets that are floating in
Right.
a hostile environment, basically.
Water.
Yeah.
Sure.
A boat lives in a hostile environment that constantly wants it to deteriorate, particularly when it's salt water and our South Florida environment. And so they need to be continually maintained. If they're not maintained, the first thing is they lose value, and then they lose integrity. And that's when they sink and that sort of thing.
Become a navigable problem.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So you want to have a crew that maintains it. One of the, and crew is the biggest issue from the standpoint that if you don't have enough crew, how do you maintain all these boats?
Right.
And one of the issues we have right now is that there is a shortage of U.S. citizen mariners.
Okay.
Is
that the result of COVID, do you think?
No. This has been
fast forward. We're out of COVID.
This
the
has
cruise
been,
situation.
Yeah, and this has been ongoing.
Okay.
I was talking to Lisa from MPT not too long ago, and
Maritime Professional Training, who
Yes.
does coursework for.
Yes.
Okay.
and just the
captains.
U.S.
Crew.
merchant mariner fleet
Okay.
is short licensed mariners. The number's going to vary depending upon who you ask. Currently, the shortage is somewhere between 14,000 and 25,000 licensed mariners just to meet the needs of the U.S. merchant marine fleet.
Wow. And what is the plan to correct that?
I don't know. I mean, it's, there's a fair amount of talk in Washington right now about getting the U.S. back into serious shipbuilding.
Sure. Yeah, and I've heard that as well.
We've got 6 state-run maritime academies.
Okay.
Which you would think, and hopefully they would be out recruiting.
Sure.
I think that part of it is I think that there's a lack of people's awareness that there's a big job opportunity out there.
Right, that's a career path. We
Yes.
talk about the marine industry is oftentimes a big a mystery to some, and sometimes we as an industry like it that way, that we tend to keep the
little
general
cachet.
public. Yeah, exactly. But then when it comes down to workforce, we really need to let everybody know it's a fantastic, tremendous industry to be a part of.
Yeah. And I grew up on Lake Superior,
Okay.
you know, and I remember in high school,
Yeah, so how did you get into the marine industry? Tell us.
well, I grew up sailing on Lake Superior.
Okay.
Loved being on the water, loved boats. And two of my brothers went off and went to Chapman's and came back, and one ran a marina, and then one became the manager of the local ferry line.
Okay.
And, you know, basically through my 20s, I floundered like many do, and went into video and film first, and got burned out with that, and moved back home to northern Wisconsin. And my brother, that was running a marina, said, "You know, we need captains. You've got the time, you've got the ability. Go get your captain's license," so that I could teach sailing and captain sailboat charters.
Okay.
Did that, and then very wise friends of mine who had worked on yachts when they were younger said, "Why are you wasting 9 months out of the year up here? Go to Florida, get
Yeah.
a job on a yacht." So I did. In 95, I came down,
And how was that? Was it everything you thought it was? Was it like, this is insane? Was it a match made in heaven right away? This is completely off the topic of the B1, B2 visa. I was just curious. I mean, because I think we all get into the industry with this, and I can only imagine it for the next generation that's coming into it now. People have this expectation of what this industry is.
Yeah.
Was it everything you thought it was? I found, for me, it was so much more than I ever thought it was. And I grew up, my family business,
Yeah.
et cetera. But you really get into it, and there's just so much more out there than I ever knew.
Yes.
Yeah.
Definitely.
There's a depth to the industry. There's a tremendous spirit in the industry. There's a ton of camaraderie. We're a very small planet in this industry, and I like
Yes.
that. Yeah.
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if that was your experience too. But
Yeah, it was, you know, and it was very, you know, the people that I worked for my first boss for 10 years.
wow.
We had 3 different boats in that time. And it was a very different industry than it is now.
And to be fair, we talked about this, just you and I chatting before this, that Department of Homeland Security did not exist during your career. So what we're talking about now and CBP didn't exist
At the start of my career.
at the start of your career.
Right.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So now fast forward,
Well, CBP did exist.
it
Customs and Border Protection
did
existed.
exist. Just the Department of Homeland Security did not exist.
Correct.
Okay.
Department of, and we can get that fact checked because I might be wrong.
Okay.
But the Department of Homeland Security became the umbrella for Customs and Border Protection. They may have been using a different name, but I don't think so.
Okay. Well, we're going to fact check here. Jordan.
Because we've always had immigration officers.
We have always had immigration officers, but maybe they were, let's find out.
According to cbp.gov, on March 1st, 2003, U.S. Customs and Border Protection was established
Okay.
as the nation's first comprehensive border travel and trade agency.
Okay, so CBP was established in
Comprehensive being the
2003.
key word.
Yeah.
Comprehensive, correct. So there was probably, like you said, another name
would
for
have
it
been
back
immigration
then. Of
enforcement
course, we
and-
didn't just all of a sudden come up with that,
Yeah.
post 9/11, just 20 years ago. But this
Because you still needed to have visas. Foreigners still needed to have visas to arrive. in
correct
the US.
it, but this umbrella, this agency, and now this umbrella, and the world that you live in now, and that you help these vessels navigate through, has only really been around for the last 20 years. So talk to me about that. So fast forward, we're here 2025. What are the biggest B1, B2 challenges for crew? Misinformation,
Yes.
lack of
Yes.
preparedness by misinformation. See rule 1.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's
And what type of information is that?
I think part of it is people thinking they're special.
Okay.
I mean, it's learn what the rules are
Right.
and follow the rules. And they, and so I guess, that is where they're getting misinformation, because whoever they're getting their information from is saying, well, you can do this or you can do that. And you can't. It's the visa, the B1 visa has been determined to be the proper visa for yacht crew.
Okay, good. That's established. Checkbox.
Yes.
B1, is it B1, B2, or do you ask for a B1?
The B1
Okay.
is, so the B visa has two sides to it. It
Okay.
has the business side, which is the B1, and it's got the tourism
Tourist
side,
side.
which
Okay.
is the B2. If you're here on a B2, the purpose of your visit is strictly for tourism.
Which is not a crew member.
Means you're going to Disney or
Yep.
whatever, visiting friends.
Sure.
The B1 means you're here for business purposes.
Okay.
And they have massaged that, or however you want to say it, that they've decided that yacht crew can fit underneath that.
Okay.
And that's all pretty much spelled out in the Foreign Affairs Manual, which is the manual that consular officers use when they're trying to determine what visa status you should be applying for.
Okay.
Okay? And there's a multitude of different, it's an alphabet soup of different visas that people can apply for.
But the crew need to apply for a B1.
Yes.
And they apply at their home country consulate.
They should be
office.
applying at their home country, at the U.S. consulate in their home country.
And what do they need to bring? What do they need to prove? What do they need to
They
have
need
with them?
They need to go online and fill out the DS-160,
Online at cbp.gov?
state.gov.
State.gov, okay.
And so it's the DS-160, and then they'll be able to set up an appointment at the consulate.
Okay.
And then at that appointment, important things to take with them are things that prove that they have close ties to their home country,
Okay.
that they have a domicile in their home country, because every consular officer, the directive that they're given is that they need to assume that the person requesting the visa intends to immigrate. And the B visa is a non-immigrant visitor visa,
Okay.
which is why when you go to state.gov and it shows it, it says NIV next to it. That stands for non-immigrant visitor visa.
Okay.
And the key is you're visiting.
Mm-hmm.
You're coming to the U.S. to visit. You're not coming to the U.S. to live. You're not coming to the U.S. to have a boyfriend or girlfriend and adopt a puppy.
Right. Okay.
You're
Your
coming
puppy needs to live in your home country.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. We're joking recently that, where
Where's
does the puppy live?
Okay. So prove that your puppy's food, the puppy's residence, and the puppy lives in your home country.
Exactly.
And that you're not coming here to this country to immigrate, but you are coming as a visitor, and to prove that you're a visitor, you have to show that you reside in your current country.
Yes.
So they need to show bills, something that is a permanent tie to their country.
Right.
They need to show that they're working on a boat,
Yes.
that they have a job.
Yes.
Okay.
And some crew will apply without having a job.
Okay.
In which case they should have the documentation that shows that that they've got that they've done training and stuff, and that they're actually
They're
coming.
qualified
Yes.
to be a crew person.
Yes.
That I didn't all of a sudden fill this out and I'm suddenly a crew tomorrow. There needs to be documentation that this is your profession,
Yes.
which all seems pretty standard. I live in this country. I'm going to go visit that one, and I'm a real crew member. These are my
Yes.
certs, and that's pretty much it. Seems like an easy process. Where's the challenge?
The challenge.
Not in the issuance. The issuance of the visa is good.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, some crew get turned down for it because they don't have because they can't prove that they have a strong enough tie to a country other than the United States.
Okay.
And it doesn't have to be their residence doesn't have to be their home country. Although for most young crew, it's going to be.
Sure.
We deal with a lot of senior crew now who may be UK nationals and carry a UK passport, but perhaps they've got a residence in Spain or something
Sure.
like that. So we have a lot of crew that are dual nationals or
Okay.
have a residence outside of their
Okay.
country nationality. So the biggest problem that we're having now is the regulations have always been the same.
Okay.
They're tightening up.
Why is that, you think?
I think it's the new administration has
Okay.
tightened some things up.
Okay. And what's been tightened?
What triggers, and I'm assuming this from my observation of escorting crew to immigration.
Okay.
And conversations that I've had with CBP officers.
Okay.
Is that when you're presenting yourself, and the CBP officer has the computer screen in front of him, and he or she does the facial recognition, scans your passport. That input goes out to a whole bunch of different agencies.
Okay.
The primary one that they're getting their information from is the Passenger Admissibility Office in Washington, D.C.
Okay.
And your face or passport may trigger an alert from them.
Okay.
Okay, if everything's done perfectly and you have been abiding by your visa, your visitor visa, and you're here for 2 months during the fall when the boat's reprovisioning, and then the boat goes to the Caribbean, and now you've come back in April for another month period to get the boat ready to go someplace else, and you've never stayed more than 6 months, but have always
Stayed within the guidelines. You haven't
Yep.
really ever overstayed
Right.
or had any extensions or had any challenges. Okay.
you're
You
going to
should be
fly
fine.
through. You're
Okay.
going to fly through. If in the case that I ran into not too long ago, out of the last 36 months, you've spent 32 months in the U.S. And only leaving for short periods of time, and out of that 32 months, only 16 were with you officially as a crew member, you're going to get flagged.
Because it's a violation of Rule 1 and Rule 2. 1, that you're not showing a permanent residence in your native country if you're spending 32 out of the 36 months in the visiting country.
Right.
And 2, you didn't have a job as a crew member for 18
For a
of
big
those
portion
months.
of that, yeah.
So
Yeah.
it seems like those Rule 1 and Rule 2 are very important in the very beginning and consistent throughout your stay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So they look at cumulative time, because that's the one thing that we run into a lot of is, well, I was here for 5.5 months and I left for a week, and now they won't give me another 6 months.
Right.
Well, first of all, they don't have to.
It is a visiting.
It is
you're
a visitor's
asking.
visa, and it is all up to the admitting officer. And if they feel that your intent is to really basically live in the U.S. and only leave every 5.5 months for 2 weeks or whatever,
Right.
they're not going to give you a pass.
Have we seen this become a problem for the industry? Is there a real challenge with crew and CBP and having the visa? Is that causing a problem with the
I'm going to say it's
industries?
causing a problem for individuals. I'm not sure that it's causing a problem for the industry as a whole.
As the industry as a whole is successfully navigating through it, boats are coming and going, crew are getting these visas, they're able to do their refit periods, they're able to come and go.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
I see that too, because I'm obviously in on the refit period on the work side, and it's a constant flow of boats either coming up from the Caribbean, coming to get their work done, they're getting ready to go up north or go across.
Right.
We see it all the time.
And I think that where we're probably seeing the biggest issue is potentially with crew that have just done a big refit.
Okay.
And I had one crew that was the case. They had just spent 6 months in Savannah doing a very large refit, and then they came to South Florida, and now the owner wants to cruise the U.S. East Coast for the summer. So that's going to have put them in the
Right.
country. They did go to the Bahamas for 14 days or something like that, a couple of weeks, and now they're back. And when they came back, the admitting officer kind of went, well, you've already been here for 6 months. He did give them all another 6 months because he was obviously comfortable with the explanation and the fact that, yeah, they are all contracted crew members on a yacht. There was no previous flags for any of them, because that's the other thing that what we're running into right now, and you hear all these stories about, oh, my deckhand was deported and this and that, and we went in through, one of the South Florida ports, and, they put him on a plane right away. They made me go buy a plane ticket for him right away. What's happening is that they're looking at the history.
Okay.
And, that crew member, which is not uncommon, may have arrived in South Florida in October, just before the Fort Lauderdale Boat Show, being, told that go to
Good place
Florida,
to go look for a job, take a class. It's going to be the boat show. Great time to find a job. They didn't find a job right away, and they were here until January before they found a job. And the officer sees that. They may have just come back in on a boat in April. Okay.
But, and they think they're golden because they arrived on the boat. The problem is the officer's looking back at their last stay in the U.S., which was for 4 months, and says, how'd you support yourself when you were here the last time for 4 months?
What's the bad answer to give?
I'm going to be honest. In one case, we had a crew member who looked him in the eye and honestly said, I was day working. Mm-hmm. And the officer said, okay, you're going to go home. We're going to cancel your visa. You'll be able to apply for a new one in 5 months. We're not going to. So they didn't
penalize, but they just said you need to go home for a period of time.
Yeah.
Done.
And he was going to have to apply for a new visa.
Okay.
But they didn't, he wasn't deported. He wasn't, because that's where there's also, deportation is a whole big legal process.
Correct. And that's not at all, just to be clear, we're going to say it here, not at all the number one task of CBP. Their job is not to deport people.
No.
Okay.
They can refuse entry, which is basically what's happening, is that these crew members are being presented, and they're being told, we're not going to allow you entry.
Turn around and go back.
Right.
Right.
And that's where it becomes an issue for the boat, because the captain is responsible in the same way that if I hop on an airplane,
sure,
and the country that I'm going to says, no, sorry, we're not going to let you in, the airline is responsible for repatriating that person. That's why you have a passport and visa check at the ticket counter before you board that plane. And so captains need to be aware of this and be fairly confident that all of their crew is going to be allowed to come back into the country, or they're going to be responsible for flying that crew member out.
So what can a crew member do? Because this happens all the time, that let's say there is a yard period, the owner gets the boat, and then the owner really wants to use the boat here, and all of that takes longer than the 6 months. Isn't there an extension that can be filed, or paperwork, or communication?
Well, and actually, yes, there are extensions that can be filed. I've got a boat up in Palm Beach that we're running into that with right now.
Okay.
And you also actually can ask for up to a year.
Okay.
And in cases where you know that the boat's going to be coming in for a refit that's going to last multiple months, and crew is not rotational crew,
right?
Because that's the other option, is you just
rotate
shift
out.
a crew,
sure,
to being on rotation, which not a lot of owners. I think the boats over 60 meters, it's standard. But when you get under 60 meters, and particularly under 50 meters,
the crew, the owners like the crew combination that they have. It's part of their family.
Yeah,
and they want that group, right? But you can ask for that. So then you can ask for your B1 visa to be a longer term up front.
You can ask for your stay.
Ahead of time.
You can ask for your stay to be longer.
Oh, okay, so the stay to be longer, and if they do that, and that stay is longer, and it's showing on record when they come back the following season, that's not going to be an alarm. That's not going to be an alert because they asked for that extension. Whereas instead of
they have to see,
overstaying,
right, but
they asked for it.
And they also have to see. So when you arrive in the U.S., you got your visa.
Yep.
And that's the ticket that lets you come into the U.S.
Yep.
And then you're stamped in.
Okay.
And that's your I-94.
Okay.
And what the I-94 is it indicates your visa status. It indicates whether you were entered as a B1, a B2. Some crew have multiple visas because they may flip back and forth between
Commercial.
private and commercial. So they may have C1Ds. So your I-94 record is going to show you your status that you were entered in and how long you were entered for, what your due out date is.
Okay.
And it's very important for crew, and particularly captains, pursers, whoever's in charge of that on the vessel, to take a look at all of the crew's I-94 records, to check their status and to check what their due out date is, because they don't stamp the passports anymore.
Okay.
And all you have to do is Google I-94 travel history or whatever, and it'll pop up, and you can look for your I-94 status.
So I think the message is very clear, because I would imagine that the visiting obstacles, challenges, task lists, etc., for other countries are just as long, if not more onerous than
Yes.
probably the United States. But CBP is welcoming. The B1 visa is the right visa. We want crew to be able to come here. We want crew to be able to be here, stay with the refit, cruise the waters up and down. It's all about communication and making sure you follow along, you pay attention to the deadlines, you pay attention to when you're supposed to leave, rotate out when you need to. Just basically follow the rules, and if you know ahead of time, communicate.
Yes.
And you won't have problems.
Yes.
And I feel that in our meetings, and I know you've sat in them, but let me ask you the question instead of saying what I feel. Do you feel that CBP is wanting to work with the industry, is supportive of the industry, or do you feel that there's merely just a compliance that, we're
No,
compliant?
they definitely want to work with the industry.
Okay.
And part of that is
I feel that way too.
That part of their directive is also to protect U.S. commerce.
Right.
And they realize in South Florida,
Yes.
they realize what a big industry it is, and that we have to have crew to run the boats.
Yes.
And I'm in and out of all three ports. I deal with immigration officers in Miami, immigration officers in Fort Lauderdale, Palm Beach, Fort Pierce. I'm going to say that probably 90 to 95% of the officers that I come in contact with are, polite. They're friendly.
Right.
Are there a few stinkers? Yes, there are.
There's stinkers everywhere you go.
Exactly. And you always have the option of asking for a supervisor, which I realize that if you're dealing with a gruff officer, yes, it's hard to look at them and say, "Can I please speak with your supervisor?"
Right.
But if you've got
It's your career and your future. You
Yes.
really need to.
and if you've got a legitimate concern and complaint, you need to. Attitude is also it's how you approach that interaction is 90% of what's going to
And how should they
dictate
approach
the
it?
outcome.
Yes, ma'am. No, ma'am.
Yeah. Be
Please,
respectful.
thank you. Be
Yeah.
respectful. Absolutely.
My
Common
biggest
sense.
aggravation is, there's always been a lot of concern about, whether or not crew should have their phones with them, because there's
Right.
been an issue with officers going through crew members' phones when they get pulled into secondary. And my reasoning for not wanting crew members to physically have their phone with them when they're arriving on the vessel and they're going into the port office to present themselves is, and it's a generational thing, they're more focused on their phone and making their plans for the evening because they've just arrived from the Caribbean for 3 months than they are paying attention to the officer. So
they're feeding the economic engine, and we appreciate that. However, yes, you're right. They need to have their attention focused on their future, and whether or not they can stay in the country to do the plans that they want to have for that night.
So, leave your phone with the captain, leave your phone, don't take it, don't walk up to the window with the immigration officer and be focused on your phone instead of what they're asking.
Common sense. Isn't that the case even in the airport? Common sense here. Common sense. Okay, so you have to, so far, the big challenges to crew are you need to show up and say please and thank you and smile and be kind. If the person you're speaking with isn't kind in return, ask for a supervisor. You need to have your I-94 information readily available in case you're going to expire soon, and understand what that is. I mean, you should be aware. I mean, I understand that the captain or a company such as yourself should have that, but wouldn't you yourself, if this is your status, you should know your status.
You're responsible for yourself. You're an 100%. Adult, you're responsible for yourself. And the interesting thing about the B visa, I run into this with a lot of captains because they want to go, well, don't I have to sign this person off? Because when they're in Europe, they have to sign the crew member on and off the boat.
Okay.
Europe is much more restrictive than the U.S., which is why I laugh when I've got people complaining about the U.S. If you've got to have a Schengen visa in Europe, it's much more restrictive. And so as a B visa holder, essentially you are your own person and responsible for yourself.
Exactly.
You're not actually assigned, you're not signed on and off the vessel as far as CBP is concerned. You're responsible for yourself. So now further to that, though, is that if you come in on a vessel, the captain is responsible for your arrival in the U.S.
Okay,
and
fair.
He basically is responsible for your admission. So if you show up, if a crew member shows up and they're denied entry or there's some other issue or, heaven forbid, you're presenting a crew member and suddenly it's flagged and it's like, well, didn't you know this guy was a mass murderer in XYZ country? The captain's responsible for knowing who they're bringing into the country.
Right. Okay.
And they're presenting them all saying, we know this person can
vouching
be here.
For them.
Yes, we're vouching for them. Yes.
But isn't there a vetting process for that crew member to join the boat anyway?
There
so
should
I'm
be.
sure that's happening.
Yeah.
So these are all, I guess, where I'm coming from and kind of making these points. So far, the captain has to have a voucher. It needs to vouch for the character and know who's coming in on their boat when they're traveling with them. And I think that every captain, including yourself, would want to know who's on the boat with them.
Yes.
And is aware of that crew member and their abilities long before they get to the shores of the United States or the port of entry. The crew then have to be responsible for themselves. They need to be polite and they need to stay off their phone. I mean, these do not seem like major task lists in order for crew to be able to enter the U.S. But beyond that, it seems pretty straightforward and hasn't changed in years.
No.
So when should the boat reach out and become a client of American Yacht Agents?
Well, you're making it sound like if they follow those rules, they don't need me.
No, but they do need you because apparently they need to understand. No, but I think that they do need you. Talk to me about the documents for the vessel. We were talking about this prior to having the actual podcast that you were talking about. Many boats, for example, under a certain size could have a new, let's say an owner just bought a brand new 130. Mm-hmm. And this is a case where, they may or may not have a company like yourself, may or may not have a yacht management company.
Right. And
so in that case, what are some of those challenges of a boat that size versus a size boat with a management company?
So as you know, boats a lot of the regulation is based on tonnage.
Okay.
And so when you get into boats under 50 meters, particularly if they've changed hands recently or gone through a series of captains.
Okay.
A lot of times the paperwork's not in order.
What kind of paperwork do they need? What do you mean by paperwork?
If they're here in the United States, they either need to have proof that they either need to have a cruising license,
okay.
or they should have been cleared in through customs, and their registry has to have been presented to customs.
Okay.
Generally in South Florida, customs no longer holds the registry. They used to for vessels that didn't have cruising licenses. Now they just take a copy of it and make sure that they have a copy on file. And then when the boat goes to leave, if they don't have a cruising license, they need to be cleared out.
Okay.
Now what happens is that you'll get boats that have sat in the U.S. for over a year, and the cruising license expires. And now we've got a new captain that comes on board, and he's like, I can't find any paperwork.
Okay.
I can't figure out when this boat arrived in Florida last. I can't find a cruising license. And it's happened on more than one occasion where we then have to kind of go, well, if you can find a log entry that maybe says when they came in, then I can go back to, customs and find out. And we've had to do this where I send in the paperwork, I send in the registry and an entry. Mm-hmm. We had this happen with a boat last year where the captain had come down from Savannah, had entered Florida, I think it was in Miami in August, and their management reached out to me in November and said, we just discovered that this captain never cleared into Florida. Mm-mm. So I went to customs in Miami and said, sent him an email and said, this is the situation. And the vessel was fortunately only issued a warning.
Okay.
Which goes against the captain. So I also made sure that we had the details on that previous captain.
Sure.
Because it's ultimately the captain's responsibility.
Right.
And, then we're able to start back from the beginning, for the boat. Although,
so it's almost like you do a status survey on the boat. You go out and say, okay, what's the lay of the land here of the crew? Who's good, who's not? Is the boat good? The boat's good, and what's cleared, what's not? No,
I mean,
not that the boat's good or not. I mean, as far as is the boat there? Is there a cruising license?
Yeah, I mean, we tell the captains what they should be looking for.
Okay,
and
the captains know what to be looking for. They know what they
some
need to
of them
have.
do, some of them don't.
Maybe the newer ones, the younger.
Yeah, and so that's, I give away a lot of time. Advising newer captains on, what they need
to have
to come in and out of the U.S. A lot of them get very hung up on whether or not they have cruising licenses, and you don't have to have a cruising license in order to be in U.S. waters.
Let's repeat that. You do not have to have a cruising license to be in U.S. waters. What do you have to have?
You have to have entered properly with customs.
Okay.
And then when you go to leave, you have to clear out with customs.
Okay.
Now,
which is telling them you're leaving.
Right.
Okay.
And that's I'm going to defer to my customs broker on that for the proper term, but I think that's just a tourist entry.
Okay.
Okay. You also get boats that may come in on a boat show bond,
okay,
or a temporary import bond, because then you get into whether duties paid, all this and that when
Sure.
you're dealing with foreign flagged, foreign built vessels, and that's a whole topic for one of the
Another
customs
day.
brokers.
Okay.
It's not
for this session.
No,
Okay.
I work with experts. I believe in making sure that you surround yourself with people that are smarter than you.
I agree.
And I work with a number of people that help me provide the guidance I provide.
Gotcha. So many times you get onto the boat. We now know what the crew basically, and let me go back. I know I'm kind of jumping all over. So we kind of went over what the crew member needs to have. We understand the responsibilities of the captain,
Right.
And
And
the
then what does
individual
the
crew
boat
number.
need?
What does the boat need? Yes.
Okay, so vessels, so foreign flag vessels, under 300 tons,
Okay.
when they arrive in the U.S., they should be using the Roam app,
Okay.
which is a CBP app that they can get on their phone, and they're going to upload passports and everything in it.
Okay.
And that actually is basically a function with through the immigration side of CBP.
Okay.
And then, and with that Roam app, they can apply for a cruising license.
Okay.
May or may not get it. Okay. Then, so for vessels arriving in the U.S. that are over 300 tons, they're going to need to have a COFR, which is a certificate of financial responsibility for water pollution.
Okay.
Then vessels over 400 tons will need a non-tank vessel response plan.
Okay.
The COFR and the non-tank vessel response plan are both fall under Coast Guard, different
Right.
divisions, and can take up to 21 days to apply to get once you apply for them. You'll be denied entry
Without them.
without them.
Okay.
And vessels over 300, foreign flag vessels over 300 tons that file their notice of arrival before coming to the U.S., if you don't have those things, it will be flagged.
Okay.
And what'll happen is you'll end up getting a captain of the port order denying you entry.
Okay. So the boat normally has to file the 96 notice of arrival. But if you're saying they haven't applied for the COFR or the
Non-tank vessel response plan, also known as
Boy, we need an
NTVRP.
NTVRP. Okay. So if they haven't applied for either one of those, the notice of the NOA is not going to be approved anyway, or it will be flagged.
It'll be flagged.
Okay. So don't show up. And where do the crew get
boats.
all of this information in advance? So they need to be planning this 3 weeks in advance, 4 weeks in advance.
Yeah,
Okay.
at least. I mean, and most of the boats, the management company, because the management company is the global,
They're aware
overseer,
of the travel log, and they'll send the reminders.
And they should be aware of what the boat needs
Okay.
to enter the U.S. But you get into, there's an awful lot of boats that are under 400 tons that don't have management.
Right.
The
That fall under the and what do they do when they get their? What does CBP offer as help?
Well, CBP.
But if that's where they're going to get clearance, and CBP is going to check and say, I don't see a COFR, I see your notice of arrivals flagged, even though they're not the governing body, do they not see those things? I'm just trying to walk people through.
Yeah, they
what the
see different
process.
portions of it.
Okay.
So the biggest thing is a foreign flag vessel over 300 tons is they have to file their notice of arrival.
Right.
And that goes to the captain of the port of whatever zone they're arriving in. If they don't get flagged, because we've had boats that have shown up that have gotten in without doing anything. And then they call me because they need something, and I start asking questions, and I'm like, oh, okay, you're here illegally.
Which isn't good either. So just because you get away with it doesn't mean it's the right thing to do.
No.
Because it's going to impede your progress elsewhere.
Yeah, again, in my experience with working with, I've had my company for 10 years now. Most of the government agencies that we work with, when it's a mea culpa, and we call and say, someone totally messed up on this one, I'm not too sure who it is, You know, and I did. I had a boat that arrived. They had not filed their notice of arrival, and it was, you know, I'm standing on the dock and I'm talking to the captain and I'm like, you know, okay, you filed your NOA? And he's like, I didn't file my NOA. And I'm like, oh, you didn't ask us to file it. And, you know, I called Coast Guard and said, this is the situation.
Sure. What do we do?
And, you know, I'm not saying that this is going to happen every time, but I'm
Right.
saying in this instance, they said, get it filed. And they looked at it and they said, this boat has never had an issue. They've been in before. We'll just issue a warning.
And well, it's probably the same as if you get pulled over in your car. If you have a very clean driving record, you get pulled over. If you happen to have a police officer that looks at your plate, looks at your license, and says, you know what, you've been a law-abiding citizen for all of these years. You're having a bad day. I'm going to give you a warning. I would imagine it's the same type with a boat, but a boat that is not compliant or that has multiple alerts,
Right.
or comes up on some sort of screen is not going to get that same type of treatment, nor should they.
Right.
So where is so let's do a recap.
Follow the rules.
Follow the rules. So
And know the rules.
I
That's
was
probably
gonna
the biggest
say-
thing is know the rules.
all of these captains should know that prior to entering a country, that there are rules to enter that country. And I'm sure that these agendas and itineraries are planned in advance. But in the end, know where you're going, know before you go.
And that's the best reason to use an agent is because your agent, no matter where you're traveling in the world, your agent should be the person that's helping you through the local regulations. All of the port state stuff is what the agent is going to handle. You know, and that's way more important. You know, especially you come into South Florida, and there's a multitude of people that can handle your provisioning and can handle your, you know, any number of things.
Electric.
Electric.
Saying. Had to do a little plug.
Well, you know, and a lot of times we're that central point of contact, particularly when a boat's coming in for a very short period of time. You know,
I've gotten those calls, Deb.
I know.
Yeah.
I think I remember calling you as I was getting ready to board a plane, and
Yep.
I had a boat that needed a corrosion survey or
Yeah.
something. And
But that's what we're all here for. But it's true, though. You knew that the boat was only going to be here for a very short period of time. Owner was joining the boat. Boat's supposed to be heading up, for doing up and down the East Coast with the owner, and now they have a problem. Of course they do. So
Right.
yeah, we're here to help.
and it's
But
easier.
an agent can do that as well, because you'll get my cell phone, and I'm going to pick up a call from you at 9:00 at night.
Right.
Not necessarily from something that looks like possible spam risk. Not that I wouldn't, but we have that relationship.
Yes.
You know,
Yeah. And that makes a big difference.
it
you know.
does. It's a huge difference.
And for the boats, if they have the option of making one phone call,
Correct.
they're going to do that.
Yep.
And the other side of it is, you know, the vendors, they know me. I've been around here for over 25 years, between working on yachts for 16 years, having my company for 10 years. And the boat's going to leave.
Mm-hmm.
And if they don't collect from that boat before it leaves, they could be out the money. Whereas they know that if I've called them, really, if any agent has called them,
Sure.
they're going to get paid.
Right. And they have a point of contact, and you will
Yes.
be helpful with that. So the recap is the B1 is the proper visa for crew members to have. Be prepared, have all of your information, make an appointment with your consulate in your country to make sure you have all of this taken care of and applying for your visa. As the captain, be sure that you're paying attention to the I-94s and everybody's status, because ultimately, while crews are individual responsibility is within themselves, the captain is still ultimately responsible for the crew and the safe
Right.
navigation of this vessel. And then the vessel needs to make sure that it has all of its clearance. And all of this information can be found on your website, American Yacht Agents. Hire an agent.
I'm
That
going
would
to
be
hesitate
helpful.
because if it's on my website or not, it should be on my website, which needs to be updated.
I'm
but-
sure it is on your website, and if not, you're going to update it and change it.
Yes.
But no matter what, they can call you direct.
Yes.
And that's going to make sure that they have a safe navigation and an enjoyable time in the United States.
Yeah, and they really should reach out to an agent prior to coming to the States.
prior to planning to come to the States so that
Yeah.
they get all of their
I mean, we've got
planning in
boats. We've got
advance.
boats that'll reach out to us a year in advance just to make sure that they have everything in order.
Yes. Boats usually are pretty good about making, yeah, and I would be willing to say this, maybe the bigger the boat, the better the plan. Sometimes it seems like on the larger yachts, they tend to have their plans much further out, and that's my experience as
Well,
far as their yard periods, etc.
Yeah, and also because dockage is a lot harder to find for a
Sure.
big boat. So
Well, and you're coordinating more people. It just takes
Yes.
more to move all
yeah,
of
when
that.
you've got a boat with 25 to 45 crew,
Rotating.
so then you're working at 40 to 80 crew that you're moving around the world. It's hard to do that on a whim. Although I'm amazed at the number of boats that I have that are in that size range that change their schedules pretty regularly.
Well, but if they were to call you, you'd be able to help them.
Always.
Always. Well, thank you, Deb, for today. We've had a great time. I've learned a lot about, the B1, B2 process, what the boat needs, what the crew needs, and in order to have a successful journey in the United States. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you for the
Thank you for
opportunity.
joining us.
I appreciate it.
Thank you for joining us this season on Season 3 of the Ward's Way podcast. Be sure you subscribe because there's much more to come. Thank you for joining us this season on Season 3 of the Ward's Way podcast. Be sure you subscribe because there's much more to come.